Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to look up a few major differences between the cars in Europe and the cars in America. This is from a channel called Kerlim and that's his opinion about that. You'll have the link in the description below so you can check his channel as well. I will leave also all my pages, so please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. I will leave you also the page of my Facebook. If you can send your feedbacks or some other ideas about what to react next, will be much appreciated. So let's get right into it.
North American spec cars and European spec cars. There's a lot of differences between North American spec vehicles and European spec vehicles. And I don't mean just the size or the types of vehicles offered, but actually the legal and regulatory differences between North American spec cars and European spec cars. It's something that the average consumer probably doesn't know, but car enthusiasts know about these differences, and we often refer to EU spec or rest of world spec versus North American spec. Today I want to cover the differences between North American spec vehicles and European spec vehicles, and why I believe European spec vehicles are actually safer than North American spec vehicles because of these differences. So let's jump in.
Yeah, right now I'm living in Canada, so basically it's nearby New York, so most of the cars are basically the same as in America. They have that red turn signal at the back, which is strange for me, and sometimes it gets confusing, especially if I'm behind someone who is turning and in the same time it's braking. It's very difficult to understand what he wants to do, if he wants just to stop or he just wants to turn. So yeah, from that point, being an amber light at the back in Europe as it is on all the vehicles, it's a lot safer because you know exactly, like, it's warning you that that guy wants to do a change in his direction of driving. So
Into it. So before moving to the Netherlands, I was used to North American spec vehicles and the look of North American spec vehicles. Things like amber parking lights, side markers, red turn signals.
for me, that side marker at the front of the cars they are even here in Canada, and it's a very strange thing. I grew up in Romania. I drove over there for about 20 years or so, and not a single car does have that, and I don't get it why, because either way, like, you have your lights turned on during the night, like the headlamps or the tail lamps. So I don't understand their purpose even now.
But actually, after living in the Netherlands and spending more time with European spec vehicles, I realized European specs are actually safer and actually better looking. You don't have the amber parking signal, you don't have amber turn signals in the rear. You know, there's a lot of these differences I'm going to jump into. So go ahead and use the chapter markers if you want to bounce around and see the differences, but I'm going to cover all of these in a bit more detail. Also, it's worth mentioning that the US and Canadian specs are pretty much the same. Canada uses kilometers and requires daytime running lights, but aside from that, basically the specs of the cars and the regulatory differences are the same between Canada and the United States. Europe has a different spec, and it's also in line with a lot of other countries that's outside of Europe, and those are the main differences that I'm going to compare today. All right, the first thing is the one that I'm the most passionate about, and that's red turn signals versus amber turn signals. The rest of the world has amber turn signals like this. It is safer, it is easier to distinguish between the brake lights and the turn signal. The rest of the world does this. In North America, red turn signals are allowed. And not just red turn signals, but actually the same light fixture that's used as the brake sometimes is used as the turn signal. In some cars, it's a separate bulb from the brake light, but they're still red. In this case, in the Mercury Grand Marquis, as you can see, it's the brake light that's flashing to be the turn signal. This has always driven me nuts, even when I lived back in the States, because it's hard to distinguish when a car is braking versus turning.
Yeah, exactly what I was telling. Like, it's very difficult to understand if he wants to turn or to stop.
Distinguish, you know, is the red light turning on because it's the brakes? Is it turning on because it's the turn signal? sometimes bulbs are out and it's hard to tell. So I've always been passionate about this. This is how it should be. This is how the rest of the world is, and this is how it should be. But this is allowed in North America, and it's actually quite common. And I've even heard from American car people that they prefer the look of the red turn signal, even though amber is objectively safer. So the Mercury Grand Marquis, even though it's here in the Netherlands, actually...
I still think that the amber light, it's a lot better even by the look in comparison, besides the safety of it, than just red, in my opinion.
Has red turn signals. The Netherlands is one of the few countries in the world that does allow red turn signals. There are some European countries and other countries that do allow it. So it's one of the things I didn't have to adapt when I brought the car over here. But objectively, I believe the amber turn signal is much better. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What do you prefer, red turn signals or amber turn signals? There's even a whole Facebook group dedicated to this. I think a lot of people are passionate about this topic, but yeah, I believe amber turn signals are much better and much safer for drivers. The next big difference that I want to cover is amber parking lights, or side markers as they're also called. It's a bit hard to see here because in the Mercury they changed out the bulb, but in North America, most cars have an amber side marker parking light that is required as part of the headlight system. Whereas you see here on the BMW, the parking lights don't require that. And if you look at a US spec BMW 3 Series, there's a big amber side marker light.
Yeah, that destroys the line of the vehicle actually. It's pointless to have it. Like, even if a guy will drive by during the night fully drunk, he will not understand anything anyway. So anyway, it will crash into your car no matter what, with or without that side marker.
Here, which I think is quite ugly. It's a look that I was used to back when I lived in the States, but actually after living abroad, I realized this is a much cleaner look. And actually, what value does that side marker light add? I don't think it's necessary. Much cleaner look. Here in the Mercury,
no, it's not necessary at all.
To white, but it was an amber parking light, the same here. But yeah, it's just a difference that I don't think is necessary, and I think the European spec looks a lot better than North American spec.
It's a lot cleaner and a lot smoother, and it doesn't interfere with the lines of the car itself.
The next big difference is side turn signal indicators. So the EU and pretty much the rest of the world require side turn signal indicators. Most of the time they're integrated in the mirror like this now, but back in the day they used to be side...
Yeah, I remember my first car, I've bought it in 2009 back home in my own country, and it was a 2005 Opel Corsa, which is basically like a Vauxhall, a small hatchback car, or Pontiac, as it was in North America. And it had actually on the front fender on both sides the side turn signal.
Mounted on the fender like you see on the Mercury here. North America doesn't require this, and to me this is a key safety feature, because when you're driving alongside a car and you want to know if that car is going to be moving into your lane, you can't see the front and rear turn signals if they're signaling their lane change. Side marker indicators are key, and really key is safety feature. Nowadays,
yeah, and right now being on the mirror, it's actually in your visual spectre than as it was before on the fender.
Most new cars in the US do have side marker indicators on the mirrors because it's kind of seen as a luxury feature, and I think it's something that the European brands kind of influence in the North American market. And actually, if you look at something like a Toyota Corolla or a Hyundai in the US, by default they don't have the side marker turn signals, but higher end trims do, because it's kind of seen as a luxury feature because of the European brand influence in North America. But I do think this is a really key safety feature that should be required on all vehicles around the world, and it surprises me that in North America it's not a safety requirement, it's not a required feature at all. Next thing I want to cover is rear fog lights. So in the EU and most other markets around the world, rear fog lights are a required feature or are just featured on cars, and they're usually on the driver's side or the center point of the vehicle. In this case on the 3 Series, it's just on the driver's side. Personally, I would prefer if it was on both sides, but this helps with rearward visibility in poor conditions such as fog or heavy rain. And this is a really key safety feature that I wish was available or actually required in the United States and Canada, because I've been in many situations in Florida in really heavy rain where you can't see very far in front of you, you can't see the car in front of you. And what people in Florida do are put on their hazard lights so you can improve the visibility, which is illegal and is kind of a dumb workaround.
No, putting the hazard lights, it will not help you in poor condition. And yeah, like I remember even on my first vehicle I had those at the rear of the vehicle, besides the front ones as well, but that wasn't mandatory. It was just as the car was, because some of them came without the front fog lights. But that person who bought the car, it took it as a additional for that vehicle. So I was lucky.
Rear fog lights solve that problem. This is something that should be standard in the US and Canada. And actually, on European brand cars in the US and Canada, they do offer the feature. They actually just ship it there anyway. It's not required, but they leave the configuration as is, and they have the rear fog lights. And the funny thing that I see is people don't know how to use rear fog lights in the US and Canada. You can see some B-roll footage here of cars in Canada driving around with rear fog lights on in normal conditions, because actually I believe that people don't know the difference between the buttons, and they think that these are regular fog lights, but they're actually rear fog lights being misused. So it's really funny to me, but I think if there was education
crazy.
and regulatory requirements.
Yeah, another thing, you are teach that from since driving school. Like, you need to go through driving school in order to get your driver license all over the place in Europe, no matter if the country it is in the European Union or not. Not to mention that when you're having the driving exam, like the actual driving exam, you're driving with the police officer right on your passenger seat, plus another one is another civil that it will come next to take the exam as a witness.
In the United States and Canada, for rear fog lights, people would use them and it would improve safety in poor visibility conditions. The next difference I want to cover is something that I notice each time that I'm switching between this vehicle and the BMW, is the side mirrors. And this was something I didn't even really know about before living here. So in North America, the side mirrors on cars are a little bit different. The driver's side is pretty flat, and the passenger side is a bit more convex, but then it has this text in it that you see: objects in mirror are closer than they appear. So you have different focal lengths for each of the mirrors. On the passenger side, it helps with the blind spot and side visibility, but on the driver's side, it's quite flat, and you have a pretty big blind spot. On the EU spec mirrors, both are convex, and there's even a part that acts like a blind spot mirror. So it's objectively safer because you have a wider field of view, you have a smaller blind spot. The problem is the image is wider and the vehicles are.
Yeah, actually, that's what I like the most, because in Europe, if you're not driving very fast, you should use always the first lane. While here, because the exits are on actually part of the highways, you cannot do that. So most of the time, actually, you are forced to drive on the very left-hand side of the highway, and probably that's the reason why they've choose to do that. But either way, like, some other people, they are way over the speed limit, so you are forced to switch lanes all over the time. So actually it can even help with that feature as well, and should be mandatory actually, because it helps you not to have so many blind spots. Because I remember when I moved to Canada, I needed to redo all over again the driving exams, writing and driving, and the only observation that I had from the examiner was the fact that I need to turn my head while I'm driving on the left side to check for my blind spots. Well, on a highway speed, it's a bit not safe to do that, because you might not see that the car in front of you is stopping for something, and while you're switching your head just in a blink of an eye, that's it, you're in his ass, to say so. So yeah, it's that for me was a very strange suggestion, and I'm not doing that because I don't feel safe doing that. I never had any major accidents. All the accidents that I had was from a standstill point and not paying attention to what the car in front of me did. So that's how I ended up rear-ending them, and obviously it was my fault. So
A little bit smaller, which affects your perception of the size. And so in North America, they only allow that on the passenger side, which to me, it's a safety thing. If you allow it on both sides of the car, you have better field of view, smaller blind spot,
exactly,
and it's a
that's
net
right.
safe.
He has
The
a
difference
point.
is license plates, and you can see American and Canadian style license plates are a lot smaller. In some cars, they look okay. Like this Grand Marquis was obviously designed for the smaller license plate, But in some other cars, this small format doesn't look very good. It doesn't complement the design of cars very well. And in my opinion, actually, the American and Canadian size license plate is a little bit less safe because the characters are smaller. You can see over here, if I were to take a Florida license plate and put it on a BMW 3 Series, which is probably the first time this has been done, you can see how small it is in comparison to the Dutch license plate. The letters are a lot smaller, it's harder to see from further back, and actually, I think the Dutch license plate and the kind of European style wide license plate complements the look of the car a little bit better, especially in the front. So I think it's safer and it just looks better to have the European style license plates. Now this varies a lot. Different countries have different regulations about license plate sizes. I'm not going to go into all of those details, but let me know what you prefer. Do you prefer the
Yeah, all over the place in Europe they have this license plate style. No matter what, it may differ the font on the back. In Romania was white with black writing. That's the only major differences between this Netherlands license plate and the one that I'm used with.
European style license plates, or do you prefer the American style license plate? Let me know in the comments below. Ultimately, I do wish that the regulations would align from North America to the rest of the world, because that would actually allow for European spec vehicles and other vehicles that are currently not sold in the North American market to actually be sold there, because the regulations would align and that would be allowed. But until those regulations align, which I don't think that'll ever happen, we'll have differences between North American spec vehicles and European and rest of the world spec vehicles. So that's pretty much it. Those are the main differences I wanted to cover between EU spec.
Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, basically he has a point and he's not wrong at all about all that. And yeah, I felt a lot safer driving in Europe than in Canada, because these are the two major areas that I was driving in. And another thing, most of the time you're driving in Europe, you're driving mostly in the city, at least in my country, than on the highways, while here it's quite the opposite way around. You're driving a lot more in on the highways than in the city, which should be more regulatory standards here than in Europe. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope I'll see you in the next time. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and that's it. Thank you.